The Sonic series has been thriving within the past few months. We got a Sonic game that actually did pretty well, 2 films that are pretty great, an ongoing comic series, and even an oncoming Knuckles TV series. Man, Sonic fans are definitely eating well, but it wasn't always the case back in the 2000s. Oh, the 2000s, what an era to be around. This was unfortunately a time where Sega wasn't doing well with their consoles past the Sega Genesis. Between the failures of the Sega Saturn and the Dreamcast, Sega had no choice but to cease all future production of any console of their own and going third party from there on. God, how weird is it to play Sonic the Hedgehog on the Nintendo GameCube? Well, it might not be all bad news. Let's rewind back to the year 2002. Both Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 would be ported over to the current gen consoles of the time, and by the next year, Sonic Heroes would be released. During the time, Yujiro Ogawa wanted a way to introduce younger audiences to classic Sonic titles from the Genesis. Thus, on November 10, 2002, for Western audiences, we got Sonic Mega Collection. Sonic Mega Collection is a compilation game that features all of the Sonic games from the Sega Genesis era, ranging from recognizable titles like Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles, to more unconventional ones like Sonic Spinball and Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, amongst a few other surprises that you might not expect. Unsurprisingly, this did bring in new fans into the Sonic series, while also itching that nostalgia that most older fans have for the Genesis. And needless to say, it was a massive hit. Well, for GameCube standards anyways. However, did you know that there's actually another game compilation after Mega Collection that's not really talked about often? Well, that's for a pretty good reason. You see, way later down the line, Sega would release another game compilation for Sonic, this time focusing more on obscure titles. The game in question happens to be called SONICGEMS Collection. Its main draw was to cover Sonic games that are really just kind of hard to go around these days. The 3 featured titles are Sonic CD, Sonic the Fighters, and Sonic R, alongside a few other additions like the Game Gear titles and Vector Man for some reason. And I mean, it didn't do badly, but nobody seems to really talk about this often. And with the recent announcement of Sonic Origins Plus, it made me really think about a topic I've been meaning to talk about since like a couple of years ago. What topic is that, you may ask? Well, I firmly believe that SONICGEMS Collection might be one of the most worthless game compilations ever. I mean, there's others out there, but for this video's sake, I'm going to specifically talking about this collection, and in terms of it being a game collection for the Sonic series, it might as well be one of the most worthless out there, because there's at least some pros to Sonic Mega Collection that Sonic Origins simply does not provide. So without further ado, let's delve into SONICGEMS Collection, take a look at what it has to offer, and counter all of that into reasons as to why this collection is not really a gem. When you boot up the game for the first time, you kind of just feel whiplash. I don't know how to describe it, but it's in your face and it just doesn't feel like much life was put into this collection. In comparison, Sonic Mega Collection has that nostalgic feel that even if you never played the Genesis Sonic games before, you feel a tinge of melancholy. Like, this is what old Sonic used to look like, and it's rewinding back the tapes and showing you what it used to be. SONICGEMS Collection just puts you straight into the game without much of anything. It just kind of flashes in your face with no sense of explanation and just saying, okay, you can just press the start button and you can just go up and check our options. Which brings us to the menu. Comparatively, yeah, Mega Collection has a lot more charm put into it than Gems Collection. Mega Collection has this little weird contraptions that are just all over the place and you're just like, wow, look at this amazing graphics for 2000 standards. Gems Collection is a literal PowerPoint presentation. I can literally make this in like, I don't know, about an hour or so. All of this to say is that obviously Mega Collection is more superior in the way it was presented. However, both games happen to have great soundtracks. Although it goes without saying that Mega Collection has the better soundtrack overall for a game compilation. Although Gems Collection isn't that bad. There are some notable standouts, but I'll save those much later in the video. For now though, the main draw for these collections is to play older games, and that's what we'll be focusing on for this video. To start things off, you might expect me to go over the 3 Sonic games that were advertised for GEMS Collection: Sonic CD, Sonic the Fighters, and Sonic R. However, I'm not going to be actually doing that. Instead, I'm going to first take a look at the Game Gear titles at hand and share some interesting trivia for the other games featured in its collection. The Game Gear games we have at hand are Sonic Spinball, Sonic 2, Sonic the Hedgehog Triple Trouble, Sonic Drift 2, Tails Sky Patrol, and Tails Adventure. These games are kind of weird picks. I mean, Sonic 2 before Sonic 1? Okay, honestly, these games play okay. I don't know if they play good enough with the D-pad of the GameCube because it's notorious for being terrible, but I usually play these games with the joystick, so it doesn't really make much of a difference. In terms of the games themselves, I won't go over my personal thoughts and opinions on any of them because that would take all day. Just know that out of all of these games, the one that's really worth playing these days is Sonic Triple Trouble. And even then, there's practically a better version out there made in 16-bit from fans, of course. I should point out that this is more notable in the essence that this is the first time that both Tails Sky Patrol and Tails Adventure was ever put out into America. Also Sonic Drift 2, but I don't talk about that game. That game is not that good. Also, let's take a look at the other 2 games that we have in America. For some reason, SONICGEMS Collection features Vector Man and Vector Man 2, which I don't know why you put them there. I mean, at least with Mega Collection, Flicky and Ristar makes sense. I don't get the relation between Vector Man and Sonic the Hedgehog of all things, but again, whatever floats their boat. Although, interestingly enough, in other versions of the game, you could potentially get Bonanza Bros, Streets of Rage 1, 2, and 3. For some reason, they are only available in the Japanese release, which is a slap in the face. These games are a lot more interesting than Vector Man, so either put them all in one package or just don't. It's really confusing and I don't really get it, but I thought I'd bring this one up at least. Okay, let's get into the main draw, the 3 obscure Sonic titles. Our first game is a game that's essentially the reason why people even bought this collection in the first place, as it's the only traditional Sonic game that's really available for GEMS Collection. The game is none other than the titular Sonic CD. Sonic CD, being a game that was released on a system that didn't really do well at all as an add-on, reasonably had reasons for it to be as obscure as it was before GEMS Collection. And, well, this was exactly the reason why people would just buy GEMS Collection. It's just for Sonic CD, the long-lost Sonic game. And how is Sonic CD these days? Well, nowadays, it seems to get more mixed reception by fans depending on who you're asking. If you want my personal input, it's actually pretty great. I will add on that maybe there is some bit of bias towards it since this is the second Sonic game I've played after Sonic Mania, but I'm not getting into that subject. Sonic CD may not have any traditional Sonic tropes that you've come to expect, like the level design is a bit more wacky and janky, the bosses are kind of pathetic, and the time travel mechanic is a bit off the first time around. But once you get the gist of how the level design works and how time travel works, it's honestly a blast to play through. I really love the exploration aspect of the game and it encourages you to look around. Is it conventional like a Sonic game? No, not at all, but for an experimental title, this is pretty great. Although there is a bit of a problem with this version specifically. Not many people tend to bring this up, but the version of Sonic CD being played for GEMS Collection is oddly enough the PC version. Yeah, this is not the Sega CD version, it just plays like any other classic Sonic game. The PC version has this weird loading time that pops in every now and then, and it just kind of feels jarring. Also, I swear, this game feels muffled at times, like the music and sound just doesn't sound that good. Also unfortunate to report that if you live in the US, you are pretty much stuck with the US version of Sonic CD, which is the one that uses the US music. It's an interesting case to be sure, and a large majority of Sonic fans tend to prefer the Japanese version for basically every reason. However, I think there's some bit of charm put into the US version that not many people tend to go over. I personally forget most of them because they aren't exactly the most memorable tunes ever coming from someone that's listened to the Japanese soundtrack first, but they're not inherently that bad. Although most people tend to point towards the boss theme because it is genuinely horrific. Now, with that being said, since this is the coveted Sonic title that most people care for anyways, This makes it one of the reasons to buy a Gems collection now, right? Well, not so fast. You see, in 2011, they released a bit of a remaster for Sonic CD, made by none other than Christian Whitehead, the same guy that will go on to making Sonic Mania. Sonic CD in 2011 is pretty much a remaster that's worth playing, as it does a lot of things that improve Sonic CD in most of every way. The more notable examples that I should include are the options to toggle between the US and Japanese soundtracks, you can play as Tails, and of course the coveted widescreen, which is pretty nice. This is a pretty good remaster, and for a good while up until last year, or about 2 years ago, you could play Sonic CD on both Xbox and Steam. Unfortunately, Sega decided to pull a GTA when Sonic Origins was announced and delisted the game alongside others for Sonic Origins, which did not really go over well with a lot of fans. I am lucky enough to still have Sonic CD to this day on my Steam library, but it kinda sucks that your only option of playing Sonic CD in widescreen is by purchasing Sonic Origins. Otherwise, yeah, this is definitely the definitive edition of Sonic CD that makes this version from Gems Collection a lot more redundant, especially since this is the PC version. God, how pathetic that must be. So yeah, that's one game knocked down, but there's still two others, right? I mean, they haven't been ported or remastered or anything, so they must be still worth playing today, right? Well, unfortunately, much like Sonic CD, there's simply better options out there for the remaining two games. In this instance, I'm going to be covering these much more short than Sonic CD. Starting with Sonic the Fighters, this is a fighting arcade game that's kind of odd, but it's a bit charming, I will say. I really like the polygonal art style the game uses that's, I'm going to assume, is a rework of Virtua Fighter because they are very similar in the way they look and play. The roster of characters is certainly unique enough. I mean, I have no idea why SBO of all characters is included in the roster. I mean, I guess nowadays it would kind of make sense because he's the more popular Chaotix member, but still. The most notable characters here are Bark the Polar Bear and Bean the Dynamite. Arguably, you could say Fang the Sniper, but he appears in other Sonic games like the Game Gear titles, so yeah. The game itself is pretty fun to play through, but it's more of a novelty than anything else, alongside the fact that the GameCube version, at least the one I'm playing through, or really any version of Sonic Gems Collection, doesn't really change the way the buttons look in the tutorials for how you use inputs, so you're essentially just left with guessing what button does what, so that's a bit annoying. Because of this and a couple of other factors, this is kind of viewed as a bit of a disappointment for about fighting game fans, but for Sonic fans, it's a cool little novelty nonetheless. That being said, if you wanted to play Sonic the Fighters now, then you might as well either own a PS3, or I guess any other future PlayStation console, I'm not sure, or an Xbox, because in 2012, there exists a remaster of Sonic the Fighters that not only adds an online functionality, but includes brand new characters, including reviving a character that was actually cut from the game, Honey the Cat. Clearly the best obscure Sonic character out there, don't argue otherwise. But yeah, Sonic the Fighters is a cool little novelty game, but you'd best be better off playing the remaster version if you had an Xbox or PlayStation. Or hell, at this point, at least port this game to Steam, because most other Sonic games are there, so the opportunity is right there, you know? That just leaves us with Sonic R. Yes, that's Sonic R. Sonic R nowadays is regarded as really just a general bad Sonic game with really dumb controls, and it's mostly known for two things. One, the out-of-place musical song numbers as tracks for the entire OST of Sonic R, which it's not that bad, although for some weird reason they're all romantic-like. I don't get why it's like that. They have no reason to go as hard as they did, but they're really, really good. Although I will say right now, Supersonic Racing, criminally overrated. I mean, come on, where are my homies at with Back in Time? And then, of course, you have the Tails doll curse. A creepypasta which is based around this stupid doll from that game. How did this get off in the same way that Sonic.exe got off? I'll never understand that. That being said, Sonic R isn't that bad of a game. I know, that's a bit of a hot take for me to say right there, and I could go into more depth with that statement, but I honestly would reserve that to a Sonic R video much later, if I ever get around to it. For now, just know that I just like Sonic R a lot more than most people do. Much like Sonic the Fighter, Sonic R is more of a novelty than anything else, but unlike Sonic the Fighters, you can definitely play through Sonic R if you're able to withstand really janky, off-putting controls. The main draw people have with this game seems to be the fact that the game is incredibly short with only about 5 tracks, which is kind of pitiful if we're going to compare it to, say, Mario Kart 64 with its 16-course roster. So now, this is the only Sonic game as of this recording that doesn't actually have a port on Steam, or rather any official way of playing it outside of SONICGEMS collection. So for that reason, you would think, oh wow, even though this game is absolutely garbage, this is absolutely worth getting Gems collection for, right? Well, let me say this right now. Surprisingly enough, no. There actually exists a superior version of Sonic R, but in the most unconventional way possible. There is a video out there that perfectly describes the definitive edition of Sonic R. Besides, the Gems Collection version has this really annoying glitch where the ring sound is surprisingly loud and it actually hurts my ears. I'm not kidding, this is so loud. Why is it so loud? Although, admittedly enough, the PC version, which is actually the version used in Sonic Gems Collection, is superior because the Saturn version, oh dear god, what is this? I mean, I'll at least admit that the Saturn version looks a little bit nicer, but god, oh god. If you really wanted to play Sonic R nowadays, whether you're as advocate with the game as I am, or if you're a freak, then simply just buy Sonic R off of eBay and put it into your computer and then follow this video and, you know, yada yada yada. This is how you get the definitive edition of Sonic R. That's really the gist of it. I mean, hell, even the Game Gear titles have superior versions. Or not really, but more accessible ones out there. Simply enough, either get Sonic Adventure DX or get Sonic Origins Plus. Or emulate them, I don't fucking know. Yeah, Sonic Gems Collection isn't exactly looking the best now with what I just said. So with all that I've covered with this subject, I think you can get a better understanding as to what I mean when I say that Sonic Gems Collection is worthless. A lot of the games at hand are either readily available elsewhere, or they have superior versions out there already. So by essence, this renders this game completely useless. By that logic, you would also argue that this would also apply to other games like Sonic Jam or Sonic Mega Collection, but contrary to popular belief, Sonic Jam actually is a bit unique in that there's no emulation involved with this title, but rather all the games were done by the ground up, which I find very impressive. And Sonic Mega Collection, although most of it is based on emulation, one, it's good emulation, not the greatest, but really good, and two, people would prefer playing this version over Sonic Origins for a variety of reasons, and I wouldn't necessarily blame them for some of those reasons. Sonic Gems Collection in comparison just simply doesn't have anything that warrants players to just visit this game back other than nostalgia, I guess? Or any reason, I don't know. This game is so weird because in its current state, there's simply and virtually no reason to ever play Sonic Gems Collection at all these days. And I think that's kind of a shame. Sonic Origins in comparison, even though it has a similar amount of charm put into the game, it kind of feels disappointing. You look at every other aspect that this game has that most people already covered by this point. Gems Collection has a lot of charm put into it, even through its simplistic direction. And it's especially more apparent with the museum. Now, up until this point, I didn't really brought up the museum for this game because there simply isn't a way for me to integrate this into the video itself, so I figured I'd save this one for last. And you know what, it's for the best. The museum is the most charming factor of the game, as it shows a lot of concept art from more obscure Sonic titles and I guess Sonic media in general. Like, a lot of these are from screensavers, and there's some concept art from Sonic R, there's some from the Game Gear Sonic titles, some Knuckles Chaotix, some screenshots for some reason, and even some movies and demos. In fact, if you're quick enough with some of these demos for Sonic games, you can actually input the level select cheat and play through any level you want, which is actually the coolest thing ever. Like, I remember one day in an early morning, I would try to beat through Sonic 1 as fast as I can, just to play through Starlight Zone. That is so amazing that the option is just there and that the game doesn't restrict you towards just beating the boss in the slowest way possible, although that is certainly more possible. It makes things a little bit more disappointing when your final image for completing every single task is just a simple congratulations image. Alongside the options for viewing the gallery, you can also change the way the music plays, and the music selected for it is odd remixes of Sonic songs that you really typically wouldn't expect to be there. Like, there's this chill rendition of Open Your Heart, this is literally, oh my god, how did this happen? Although my personal favorite by far is the surprising remix of the Underground theme from Game Gear Sonic 2 and the Sonic 3 title and the Sonic 3 menu remix. Seriously, the music I've been playing up until this point is pretty much amazing. Please go listen to all of the music remixes that SONICGEMS collection has to offer. I don't see people talk about those often. However, with that being said, I think that's all I really wanted to say about SONICGEMS collection. SONICGEMS collection remains itself as a bit of a novelty, but unfortunately its value just kind of decreases over time to the point where it becomes nothing more than just a worthless gaming piece of media. Now, that doesn't mean that it's completely worthless. To some of you, there's still some value left within this game, like maybe you find some sense of playing Sonic the Fighters or Sonic R that you probably might not think about before. That was actually the reason why I bought SONICGEMS collection in the first place. I wanted to play Sonic R and see what the fuss was about, and yeah, that's where things went on from there on out. What makes this game a lot more harder to swallow was actually something that I didn't really mention at all in this video up until now, much like the museum. The fact that the game kind of fails to showcase more obscure Sonic titles. I mean, yeah, Sonic CD, Sonic R, and Sonic the Fighters are pretty obscure back then, but there still could have been other games that could have been showcased, like Sega Sonic the Hedgehog and Knuckles Chaotix, which is something the critics have pointed out before. If those games weren't there in SONICGEMS collection, then the value for this game might have been completely different, because Sega probably aren't going to be bothering with Knuckles Chaotix or Sega Sonic, or hell, even the more weirder titles like Sonic Eraser. I know this game isn't necessarily anything good, but still, the effort could have been there. As is, SONICGEMS collection remains to be one of the most odd pieces of a game compilation I've ever seen. And with the rise of Sonic Origins Plus adding in the Game Gear titles and more accessible ways of playing the games that was featured in GEMS collection, it unfortunately makes this gem a little bit more rusted and not really worth your time. I wouldn't say you shouldn't be playing SONICGEMS collection now, because there's still reasons to play through this game, but all I'm trying to say is that in this current day and age, SONICGEMS collection is nothing more than just worthless. And I think that's a sad way to go out. Thank you for providing us with a lot of the obscure Sonic titles of GEMS collection, but unfortunately, time is moving forward. Your value amounts to nothing, and yet I thank you for giving me an awesome experience as a teenager. I'll never forget you, SONICGEMS collection, not for a very, very long time.